like admitting it is a really hard thing to do, right? He struggled in different ways than I did, but it ultimately came down to, he had to work through it in his side, and then I worked through it in my way. Now, we can both now at this point, and we talk about it together, where it's like, hey, I remember X, Y, and Z. And he's like, I don't remember that. So we have blocked stuff out of like our memories to protect ourselves, right? That's kind of like a protective function for people that have gone through childhood traumas. That's one tool that will be used. And so there's stuff that he's forgotten, there's stuff that I've forgotten. And when we come together and have those conversations, we're able to clue each other in. And it's almost like being in like an escape room. We help each other to figure out, oh, you have the key. Okay, I have, this part over here. And we're making progress together.
Hello, this is Voice Your Mind podcast from Listening. Welcome to our show where we talk about the unheard who have no one to share about their insecurities and past trauma, or even having difficulty opening up to people when feeling down. On this show, we will be discussing everything about mental health, depression, and suicide. We listening are just ordinary people who are or were in your similar state and are currently encouraging ourselves and learning to improve our state of mind. So here we are taking a step towards motivating you to get better with us every day of the week. So without any further delay, let's get started with the episode.
Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. It's your host Srirante. Today we have a guest, someone who has been teaching men not to fit in the man box of toxic masculinity and helping them to overcome fear, anxiety, depression. Not only that, he's also encouraging people to live life boldly, courageously. I'm talking about Mike Forrester. For those of you who don't know him, he is the men transformation coach, founder of Living Fearless program, and also a host of the Living Fearless podcasts. I'm really, really excited to know about his experience and his insights and advices. So, Mike, thank you for your time. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm totally honored to be with you on the podcast 3. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Mike, I know everybody have already asked you this question, but for some people who really, really curious about your journey, tell us more about your journey and how has your journey been so far? It's like, for starters, we should talk about this.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a father of 4 adult children, 2 grandchildren, and been married 28 years. I mean, I've been married. I'm like trying to sit here and do the math. We'll go with 28. So it's been since 1994. So if I'm off on my math, don't tell my wife. But
promise.
So I would love to tell you that they have been euphoric. But what happened was my childhood trauma, the upbringing that I went through, then as an adult, played into my marriage and my parenting. And it was really rough for my wife. I mean, she's married to a guy who's angry, frustrated, very verbally abusive, loud, right? Which is very different from what she was raised with. And so it caused a lot of division and strife and unsure, like insecurity on her side about our relationship and me as a dad. Now, what had led up to that was I was one of 2 children. I was the older of the 2 of us. And my mom and dad came into it with their, like their own baggage, right? And this is not to say like, hey, my mom and my dad, were absolute horrible people. They learned what they did and they acted from it. Just like, you and I, Sri, we've learned things, our experiences have gotten us to this point, and they acted from that. I'll be honest, I hated my parents for the longest period of time. And I swore up and down, I would never be my parents. You want to guess? I ended up exactly like them. And so it was coming from that place, then entering into my marriage and as becoming a dad, that then I started to see problems. I wasn't where I wanted to be. So in me asking for help, that was something I had been taught and understood to be a point of weakness. And it's actually, that's a point of strength. That's how we grow, right? If I don't know how to do something, I need to ask. And yet I was in the IT world. I could easily ask a problem, Sri, how do I code this? How do I develop this? Wouldn't have a problem. But if it came to the point of asking for help, how do I be a better person? How do I not be so angry? How do I love my children properly? I was afraid to ask. Once I did ask, things then changed. So that's a quick summary of the journey there.
Thanks for sharing, Mike. I've got a few questions, if you don't mind me to ask.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that you could just easily ask questions in your workplace, but not in terms of asking your family that what you need to do so that they can be more comfortable with you?
Good question, Sri. It was honestly one of pride and the whole thing of seeing that if I asked a question related to that, it was like I didn't have it together. Nobody wants to be in the position or be seen as I'm a failure. I don't have the answers, I don't have it together. And it was more of one of those that I guess you can fake it. It's behind closed doors. You can hide that off. If you and I are colleagues, we're working together and I'm not turning in my work, that's a whole lot easier to see than, hey, I'm going home and I'm, yelling and just being angry at home, right? You're not necessarily going to see that. And so something that's maybe more visible kind of puts you in a situation where you need to ask questions faster. Whereas when it's kind of more hidden, you're not forced into that. And I didn't have like the example from either of my parents of them asking questions. They were both angry, very abusive with each other. That was really the environment. And I think it was admitting also to myself, hey, this isn't healthy. What I came through was very unhealthy, toxic, right? Just a lot of manipulation. None of us really want to admit that. And so it was kind of twofold in that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You have a brother, right?
I do have a brother, yes.
How did he cope with this abusive situation that you faced too?
So for him, he struggled, but in different ways. So he ended up both of us looked for like healthy families. We both wanted to be included in, like in a family, to be wanted, to be included, to be loved. Things are off, but it's like admitting it is a really hard thing to do, right? He struggled in different ways than I did, but it ultimately came down to, he had to work through it in his side. And then I worked through it in my way. Now, we can both now at this point, and we talk about it together, where it's like, hey, I remember X, Y, and Z. And he's like, I don't remember that. So we have blocked stuff out of like our memories to protect ourselves, right? That's kind of like a protective function for people that have gone through childhood traumas. That's one tool that will be used. And so there's stuff that he's forgotten, there's stuff that I've forgotten. And when we come together and have those conversations, we're able to clue each other in. And it's almost like being in like an escape room. we help each other to figure out, oh, you have the key, okay, I have this part over here, and we're making progress together, from what we both recall, what we've both experienced, and just being able to have those open conversations.
It's really great to have someone who actually shares your problems, I can say that. Like the problems or the traumas that you both have faced equally. And yeah, I think it's great to have someone with you in this journey. You can sort of say journey. I can
Yeah.
say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we go back to the past, and where you said that you've been verbally abusive, yelling at your children, and then you changed. I mean, you have learned you wanted to change for your family, but your children must have been scared of you at that time. I mean, they were just like couldn't be more comfortable with you and couldn't share anything. So how did they manage when you just not I shouldn't say suddenly, but when you just started changing for them, for their own good, for being a great dad, being a great someone who can they confide with. So how did they manage to I mean, how did they manage to be in that situation? I could say that.
So just to set some context on that, my children were probably between 8 and 14 by the time that I started to change. It was one of, you can imagine, in that kind of time frame, they had learned to adapt to how I react and how I behave. Okay. So along that pattern, or that time frame, sorry, the pattern that I had set out was I would go and experience different events, things that I wanted to have help me, but until I really wanted that change and I was determined to do the hard work to really dig in, it became one of more, I would say from their side, it was more of feeling manipulated. So I would go away, I'd change for a bit, and then I'm right back into it. And then I'd go to another event and I change and I'm right back into it. And so you can imagine when you're working with somebody, like friend, father, mother, whatever, when you see a pattern like that, you start to not trust as much that, hey, this time it's genuine, right? There's a certain apprehension to, is this real? So when it did become something for me where I was doing the hard work and I actually made the change, I had to be patient, because while I knew for me, it was a different heart, it was a different, mentality, I was in a different place. I needed to be patient for them to begin to trust that, yes, hey, this is going to be long term. This isn't something that's just a flash in the pan and dad's going to be next week right back to who he's been. So it wasn't an overnight thing either on my side or on their side. It took each of them different times, like different lengths, to begin to trust me. And some of them were faster, some of them were slower, but it was one of those of having conversations with him as things went along to say, okay, what is it that you're feeling uncertain about? Why do you feel you can't trust me in this situation? So that I can understand their perspective and where they were at, how they felt, to calm down on my side. Because I mean, it is frustrating when it's like, I'm really this way, this is me. So it took time on both sides to make that transition from where things were to where they are now.
I can really agree to the fact that when someone just show you a one side and then suddenly that changed, it's really hard to trust them. And yeah, it sometimes happens to me, and I really don't know how to react to that. Okay. Um, I have actually one more thing to ask. When
Sure.
I was just researching about you, and then this thing popped up in my head. Like when you became transformation coach, a men transformation
Mhm.
coach. So, how did your parents actually take it? I mean, did their views shifted, and did they realize that they have done some harm in your, like in your childhood, or should I say that they have made a huge impact, like worse impact in your mind? So, did they realize that stuff? And if they did, how like they are doing it?
As
Just
far
making
as like
that
my
things up.
parents, is that what you mean? How did they handle it?
Yeah,
So at this point, both of my parents have passed away. My dad most recently,
I'm so
and that
sorry.
has actually been honestly, that's been a recent event, Sri, with my dad. So um, part of what I had to do to make it healthy for me and my family was to put in something called boundaries. Is that something you're familiar with? Okay.
I get to that a lot of time. The boundaries,
Yeah.
we really need them.
Yes. And so the boundaries, and if anybody's listening that doesn't know what it is, boundaries are just putting up like a parameter, almost like a corral that says you can do this within this kind of environment. And it's to create a safe space for ourselves or those that are in our family, right? Our loved ones. And so I started putting up boundaries around my parents. Now, my mother was paranoid schizophrenic. That wasn't um, diagnosed until, gosh, probably 15 years ago. And I was in mid 30s at that time. So, this was after I had started working on myself. I implemented boundaries, and then my mother just didn't want to handle those. Like she didn't like having rules around how she could relate. And so she pushed back hard on that stuff. I didn't be I didn't begin pursuing becoming a coach until much later. My dad, I've tried working on a relationship with him, but he just wanted to live in his glory days, so to speak, when he was, um, you know, overseas in the military. That was where he felt the most confident, comfortable, and strong. And so he wanted to live in those days. And I was just like, Dad, this is not something that, I want to partake in. And so he ended up, his health declined. And my brother and I still stayed in touch with him periodically, but he just continued to push that boundary, right? And ended up finding out about a month and a half ago that he had passed away, and he hadn't listed either my brother or I as points of contact. So it's been really challenging trying to find out how he passed away and all of that. But neither one of them wanted to make a change, right? They were set in who they were. It was one of those of the idea of change was more uncomfortable for them than it was staying where they were at. And that included, I mean, my mom, when she was diagnosed, like the cops actually came out to put down a situation because my mom had confronted the neighbor, and that didn't go well. But when the officers came out, they then called out like a field clinician, like a psychologist, and they ended up taking her into the mental hospital to assess and go further. They ended up giving her medication, and she took it for a bit so that she could get released. But once she was released, she didn't want it. So it was just this dissonance between, what she knew was reality, and then with the medication, how it helped her. And she just didn't want to take it. So neither of them wanted to make that change, right? So it became more crucial for me to just become at at peace with it from my side and say, hey, mom and dad, I forgive you. But that doesn't mean that, we're going to go back to, like leave it to beaver, just kind of hunky dory, everything's, okay, and let you back in the door with my family. My priority is still to love and protect them. And so, yeah, they didn't ever experience it, but it wasn't something that they wanted to move along with.
First of all, I'm really sorry for your loss. I really
Appreciate
didn't mean to hear that, but yeah, I'm sorry.
No, no,
And
no, no, no. Sri, you're good. There's nothing that it's totally open book. If there's something that I'm not comfortable with, I'll tell you. But just to give you context, yeah, it's still a work in progress. You know what I mean? And you and I healing, right? As the listeners are healing, understand not everybody's going to come along in that journey with us. It means that if we're going to change, that makes it uncomfortable, because then they need to decide, am I going to stay where I'm at, or am I going to change? So there's nothing bad about that. I appreciate the sentiment. Thank you so much. But they made their decision, you know what I mean? And so I needed to make mine, and how I dealt with them versus what I felt responsible and where my heart was for my family and myself. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's what they did.
thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. Um, uh, in many cases, people feel guilty for setting boundaries, especially when it's about the parents. So, did you ever feel guilty for setting boundaries? And, you
Yes,
know,
very much so. I mean, it's awkward, it's
yeah, I know.
for me, and maybe this is the same for you. It was so different. Like, I was uncomfortable in telling somebody no, because my identity and the way that I felt approval at that time was when people felt approved or included, or I was able to do something for them. And when I'm telling them no because it's, harmful to me, it was challenging. And so it was like getting on a bike, if that makes sense. So you jump on, you pedal for a little bit, you're off balance, you may fall and scrape your knees, but you get back up on that bike. And it's the same way with boundaries. Boundaries are hard. I mean, I struggled with it at a large level. It when I put in boundaries, it wasn't just challenging and saying no to keep it healthy for myself. It was also, I wasn't receiving almost like that approval and that acceptance. And so it created more of a void within me. So it was like a double-edged sword in some aspects, where, as I'm saying no, because it's a healthy thing, I'm also lacking the thing that I was connected to. So it might be like, doing a detox from sugar or caffeine, or, like you're doing the right thing, but there's also that withdrawal, that side effect for it. So yeah, it was very challenging.
Yeah. And you started to doubt yourself that if I'm doing the right thing or not.
At that point, I had gotten healthy folks around me, and I had started talking, more openly with my wife. And so I was able to get feedback from people that I respected. I think that's the crucial thing, is we're surrounding ourselves with people that are for us in getting to a healthier place. We can always find people that just want to be with us, but the difference is that you want to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that are looking for the healthier version of you. And so being able to say, here's the situation, here's what went on, and here's how I responded, what did I do right or wrong, was very helpful for me. Now, it also required me being open to hearing when, hey, you did this wrong, Mike, because you can imagine something new, I'm going to do it wrong. There's going to be things I'm doing right, but it's a new skill. It's just like a new muscle. When we go to the gym and we work out our biceps or our legs, they're going to be sore. Our form may not be great. Same kind of thing. Certain stuff I was doing right, other stuff I wasn't. But through the practice of doing it, of setting boundaries where they needed to be put, it became easier and I was better at it.
I love how you are just giving examples for making people simply understand those things that you're trying to say. Thank you so
Thank you. I
much.
appreciate it.
I wanted to ask you one more thing, that you talk about silent suffering in one of your podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
The silent suffering.
Yeah.
So how would you, what would you advise somebody who actually suffering but don't have somebody to talk to? For instance, if somebody is listening right now and he or she is suffering from any mental trauma or just anything that's been horrible in their mental health, so how would you what would you give them, what would you advise them to do right now?
Okay. Let me just define what silent suffering is, as far as if you look at the difference, right? You will stereotypically see that ladies are usually more open to going and getting help, right? Saying, hey, I'm not feeling right. I'm going to go, whether it's talking to a girlfriend, whether it's talking to a clinician, a coach, whatever. Communication comes more naturally. Whereas with the guys, it's more of buck up, don't connect with your emotions, don't share your emotions, God forbid that you do that, because then you're not a man, right? And so those messages have been put out there. And for the guys, it's we will shut down, we will just be quiet and persevere, try and push through. And so if you look at like statistics for depression, you will see that the women have a higher percentage and the men have a lower percentage. But it's not to say that there aren't more men that are suffering than that percentage. It's just that they're not going and asking for help. So it's that silent suffering, is just they're still there in the depression, but it's not being counted because they're not stepping forward. And so that's more prevalent with the guys. Like I said, typically the ladies will be like, help. The guys are like, nope, I'm going to go medicate in some way, shape, or form, whether it's food, alcohol, working out, video games, whatever the case may be, right? Just you cope with it rather than addressing it. And so it's one of those, as far as getting help, whether it's for the ladies or for the men, is to ask, realize you're not alone. So, if I'm in my room and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this situation is just overwhelming, I'm not the only one that feels that way. That is something that's normal. If I'm facing a situation where, hey, I'm struggling with my marriage, I'm struggling with my children, I'm, at work, whatever environment it may be, you're not the only one that's in that. And so being able, again, to go to those healthy relationships that you have around you and say, hey, can you relate? Can you guide me through this? Can you just listen to me? I think is so vital. Stepping out and actually verbalizing it is just so powerful, rather than sitting there and letting it stew. Because as we sit alone, we will often sit there and just almost like an Instagram reel, just let it play over and over and over, and it just compounds and intensifies the feelings of being alone, being in a bad position. When we realize that we're in it with others, and there are other people that want to help, and we start making small steps in that direction, then we can address what's going on. So just be verbal about it. Now, I'm not saying just, like go out on Facebook and post this as like, hey, I'm having problems. That's not at all what I'm talking about. Be wise and be selective, because again, you're looking for people that are going to help you go forward, not those that are going to try and bring you down or cut you down, say, hey, I told you, I tried to warn you about this. That doesn't help you, doesn't help me. I mean, you want people that are going to go, wow, I get that. All right. What can we do to help you move forward? So, yeah, I mean, those are some basic stuff that you can do. And it's also then looking at what is the severity of this? What's the likelihood of it actually coming through? So it could be, something that we build up in our head, and it's like, well, how likely is that going to happen? I'm going to run my car off the road. Okay, it's dry outside. There's no wind. I have my sunglasses on. The car is in great operational shape. How likely is it that I'm going to drive off the road? Not very. Can it still be a concern? Yes. But being able to look at it and separate it and go, this is not something that's really going to occur or doesn't have a high probability. Kind of can reframe stuff for us, to bring that tension down to where we're not feeling so overwhelmed or, having our anxiety at a high level.
Thank you so much for that. I hope those who are listening, they can actually work on your advice and help themselves out.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we're not in this alone. So it's like, reach out, whether it's to Sri or me or a friend of you, like just a friend in your circle. Reach out. Don't go this alone.
The last question, promise,
Sure.
last question. I think having abusive, if be it verbally or physically, or the parents who don't understand their children, um, they don't really, uh, help the children to have a great self-esteem or having a good confidence on themselves.
Mhm.
So, what would you advise to uh, the people who have uh, or who have been brought up in this kind of households to have a confidence that actually to have a healthy, good confidence in themselves? Because I really suck at confidence. I have a really low self-esteem, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
That's how it is. So what would you advise? I really need it.
Well, and I mean, this goes back to the same thing, like when we're working on our situations. So often it's like we feel like it's like I'm the only one that's having a problem. You're not, right? Guess what? We enter into a room, the majority of us are having a problem with that, where it's like, oh my gosh, if Susie over here really knew what I'm struggling with and what I came through, Susie wouldn't want to be my friend. Bob over there, Bob, if he knew, like, X, Y, and Z, we're afraid of what people really might know about us, when the fact is we don't really know the same stuff about other people. And so there's a certain amount that we all let others see, but understand that everybody is struggling with stuff at a certain amount. Okay. Then it's also understanding, how your parents reacted and behaved is not a reflection of your worth, your value, your ability, any of that. And so it's learning to separate. And I'm not talking like this is just going to be like, hey, I got up out of bed and oh my gosh, I have this down. It's going to take some time. Okay. Because you're resetting your thought process, your feelings, you're resetting all of that. And so be patient with yourself. It's also going to entail forgiving yourself. And sometimes that can be the hardest part, is we feel a guilt or shame because of what went on. And it's letting that go and just going, my parents did what my parents did because of what they had experienced and been brought up under. But I'm an adult. I now am choosing not to follow in their footsteps. And it's giving yourself space to work on it. Because for the longest time, Sri, I looked at myself as I'm a victim of what my parents did to me. I didn't want to take the responsibility to say, hey, I can make a change. We're all capable of making the change and becoming who we want to. It's almost that first step is the hardest one, saying I'm going to commit to this, right? Think about it. It's like January 1st. What do most of us do on January 1st? We set goals, right? And it's the hardest thing is to get out of bed where you're totally comfortable and you're at ease. And it's like, I don't really want to get out of bed and go to the gym. But it's like, once you start moving, you get out of bed, you find your clothes, you put your shoes on, you get out the door, you're a little more committed for each thing you do. And it can be the same way with our emotions and how we change, is to, I'm going to work on this one aspect of me. Because if we try taking everything into account where we feel like our shortcomings, our failings are, like where we don't measure up to who we want to be, if we try and take that all on, it's way too daunting. I mean, just take a small piece, work on that, gain confidence. Because if you think about it, day one of going to the gym, you don't have like that commitment level, right? Day 10, you're a little more committed, you're more confident. Now you've been in the gym a little bit longer, you know where the workout stations are, you know what your routine is, you're more confident, you're able to move within the gym more assuredly. And it's the same thing with how we grow. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect. I expected myself to be perfect, in all honesty, but what's the reality of that? The one thing that helped me was I could look at you, right? And I could go, if Sri was struggling with this, what would I tell her? Because oftentimes we're more critical of ourselves than we are of our friends or our family. We don't give that grace, that patience. And so we're just hypercritical of our actions or our stumbling, right? When we don't get it right. So sometimes what helps is to just reframe it and go, hey, if Sri did this, what would I tell Sri? And I will often find that it's like, I give myself more grace. I did better. And I'm able to celebrate the progress. It's like, okay, hey, that would have taken me, 4 days before to get my head back in the game to feel okay about stuff. Whereas, hey, it took 12 hours. 12 hours still isn't where I want to be, but holy mackerel, 12 hours is way better than 4 days, right? So it's like looking for the wins, giving ourselves grace, picking an area, and being as consistent as we can be are all tools that will help us to make that transformation. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, right? So for me, I'm working to get down to 185 pounds. I was all the way up at like 260. What do you think the likelihood is that I'm going to get there overnight or within a week's time frame? It's not likely, right? It's going to take time. I didn't get here overnight. And so giving ourselves just that grace, that patience, the time to stay committed for the long haul is honestly like what gets us to where we want to go. So when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just struggling with this. Okay, what triggered it, right? If you look at when you kind of start feeling like you're doubting yourself, there's usually stuff that will lead up to it. One of them could be that you're feeling lonely. One could be that you're tired. There's certain things that will almost kind of like take down our ability. And so it's important that we do self-care as we're improving our emotional and our thoughts, like as we're making that transformation in our life, is to take care of ourselves physically as well, because that will often feed and fuel how much endurance we have in the fight that we have going on. Does that make sense?
Yes. Actually, I really agree with you on that part, that we are really harsh to ourselves more than we are to people around us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can't really do the thing that we really want to do. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you. Really, I had a really great time talking with you.
Thank you,
And
Sri.
as I said that I was really excited about these conversations with you, and I had a really great time. Thank you so much.
I did as well.
Before we just wrap it off, where can our listeners find you?
So the two easiest ways, like if what I'm saying resonates with you as a guy that's listening, you can come over, listen to the podcast. It's Living Fearless Today. And the easiest way to find that is livingfearlesstoday.com. And, you can always go to, if you're on social media, it's Hi Coach Mike. So HI, like hi, hello, Hi Coach Mike. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And the biggest thing is just, you're not alone in this. Just like Sri has talked about, some of the stuff that she's working through and worked through, and I've talked about, just come away from this that you're not alone and it can be done. There's hope in the transformation.
I already follow you on Instagram, by the way.
Very cool. Thank you, Sri. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mike. And all the links will be in the description. And it's your host, Sridhanti. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you really, really much. And thank you for encouraging me to do this interview. Thank you.
Yes, you've got it. Keep it up.
And that's the end of today's episode. I know taking action is quite a hard job to do, so I hope the advice and insights we got today will help you to take the leap of faith and pursue your dreams. You can share your story with us through the first link in the description box, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on the Apple Podcast. We will come back with another episode. Till then, keep healing, learning, and growing. Thank you.